7.6, we're solving trig equations, and there are a lot of different things to think about before we start. We kind of want to plan ahead. You want to notice if it's linear or quadratic. Quadratic means you're going to see an x squared, or like a sine squared theta or something like that. Because you're going to have to proceed in different ways depending on what the problem looks like. If only one trig function is present, that's the easiest thing. We're going to be able to isolate the variable. That's what we want to happen anyway. But that won't happen all the time. And a lot of the times there's going to be more than one trig function. And so like if you see a sine squared theta and a sine theta, or if you see a sine theta and a cosine theta, or something like that. If there's more than one trig function, or there's more than one variable function, you're going to try to factor, okay? So set one side equal to 0 and try to factor and solve. Sometimes you won't be able to solve, but you can use quadratic formula. Otherwise, you've got some other tricks you can do. Maybe you can square both sides, or maybe you can use the identities to do a substitution or something. But you've got all these different things that you could try. I tried to set it up as this flow chart. I think that makes your decision process a little bit easier. Try and follow through this flow chart. It says the same thing as this chart, pretty much. Okay, so we look at example 1. We're solving 2 sine theta plus 1 equals 0 over the interval from 0 to 360. So look at the flow chart and ask yourself the question, how many variable terms are there? How many variable terms are there? There's only one. It's that sine theta, okay? It's not as simple as saying how many variables there are, but how many variable terms there are. I see one variable term, and so that makes this kind of easy because we're just going to go straight down here and isolate the variable. If there's only one variable term, we should be able to isolate the variable. And, think about if that said 2x plus 1 equals 0. I don't want to write that down, but you would subtract 1 and divide by 2. Hopefully you can see that. And it's no different. We're going to subtract 1 and divide by 2. Sine theta equals negative 1/2. We're not finished because we don't have the variable isolated. We don't have the variable by itself. And so if you remember back a couple of chapters or whatever, we're going to have to do an inverse sine. If you were using a calculator, you could think about this as, let's take the inverse sine of both sides. I don't know that we need to write that down. I don't want to write this down. But if I was using a calculator, I'm doing the inverse sine of negative 1/2. I think it's a lot better just to look at the chart. Okay? We know this, we recognize this 1/2 from the chart. And so if you use the chart, you're going to find your sine theta, and you're going to find your 1/2, and you're going to go backwards and find the angle that produces that 1/2. Okay? Now notice we're in degrees. That's something you're going to have to pay attention to because sometimes we'll be in degrees and sometimes we'll be in radians. Here we're in degree mode. So what angle would produce that 1/2 from the chart? 30. You should see that 30-degree angle. Okay? This answer is not negative 30. Don't say the answer is negative 30. That's not right. Okay? And it can't be right because you can't give me an answer that's not between 0 and 360. It can't be negative 30. That negative sign, remember, we've done this before. We're talking about what and where. The what comes from the chart. We got that 30 degrees straight from the chart. But the where, we have to think about where a sine function would be negative. Or where a y value would be negative. And I've done this a lot of times. We know the sine values or the y values are going to be negative downstairs in the 3rd and the 4th quadrant. And so what we have to think about is a 30-degree reference angle where sine would be negative. And so there's one in the 3rd quadrant. That's 30 degrees past 180. That's 210. And then there's one in the 4th quadrant. That's 30 degrees before we get all the way around to 360. That's 330. So when we look at this, when we try to solve this equation, the variable is theta, and that's what we've just found. We've just found 2 different answers. Theta equals 210 degrees and 330 degrees.